The Yom Kippur War, also known as the October War, was a major conflict fought between Israel and a coalition of Arab nations led by Egypt and Syria in 1973. The war lasted for 3 weeks, from October 6th to October 25th, and resulted in significant losses on both sides. The Yom Kippur War was preceded by a series of events that had heightened tensions between Israel and its Arab neighbors in the years leading up to the conflict. The most significant of these events was the Six-Day War of 1967, in which Israel had decisively defeated the combined armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, and had gained control of significant territories, including the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. The Arab states, particularly Egypt and Syria, were eager to regain their lost territories and to restore their honor after the humiliating defeat in 1967. In addition to territorial disputes, the war was also driven by ideological and political factors. Egypt, led by President Anwar Sadat, had aligned itself with the Soviet Union, while Israel was closely allied with the United States. This ideological divide was further exacerbated by the Cold War, which had intensified in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. The war was also influenced by domestic factors in both Israel and the Arab states. In Israel, there was a growing sense of complacency and overconfidence following the victory in the Six-Day War, and a reluctance to make concessions to the Arab states. In Egypt and Syria, there was a desire to avenge the defeat of 1967 and to prove that the Arab states could stand up to Israel militarily. The war began on October 6, 1973, when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. The attack, which took place on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur, was designed to catch the Israeli military off guard and to exploit the perceived weaknesses in Israel's defenses. The Egyptian forces crossed the Suez Canal and quickly established a bridgehead on the eastern bank. The Syrian forces, meanwhile, launched an attack on the Golan Heights in the north. The initial Arab advances were successful, and they quickly gained significant territory. The Israeli response was slow and initially disorganized. The Israeli military had been caught off guard by the surprise attack, and the troops were not fully mobilized. As a result, the Arab forces were able to make significant gains in the early stages of the war. However, the Israeli military soon regrouped and launched a counterattack. Israeli forces crossed the Suez Canal and established a bridgehead on the western bank, while in the north, they pushed the Syrian forces back from the Golan Heights. The Israeli counterattack was highly effective, and they were able to retake much of the territory that had been lost in the initial Arab advance. The war continued for another 2 weeks, with both sides launching offensives and counter-offensives. The fighting was intense and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Arab forces, in particular, suffered significant casualties, with estimates suggesting that up to 15,000 Syrian soldiers and 8,000 Egyptian soldiers were killed in the conflict. The Israeli military, meanwhile, faced significant challenges in maintaining its offensive operations. The long supply lines and difficult terrain made it difficult to sustain the momentum of the counterattack, and the Israeli forces suffered heavy losses in the fighting. The war also had significant diplomatic ramifications. The Soviet Union, which had been providing military and economic support to Egypt and Syria, threatened to intervene on their behalf. The United States, which had a close relationship with Israel, also became involved in the conflict, providing military assistance and diplomatic support to Israel. The United Nations Security Council also became involved in the conflict, passing Resolution 338 on October 22nd, calling for an immediate ceasefire and for negotiations to resolve the conflict. The ceasefire came into effect on October 25th, bringing an end to the fighting. The Yom Kippur War had significant political, military, and diplomatic consequences for both Israel and the Arab states. The war highlighted the continued tensions between Israel and its Arab neighbors and demonstrated the willingness of the Arab states to use military force to achieve their goals. The war also had significant military consequences for both sides. While Israel ultimately emerged victorious, the conflict exposed weaknesses in its military strategy and tactics. The surprise attack by the Arab forces had caught the Israeli military off guard, and their initial response was slow and disorganized. The war also demonstrated the importance of intelligence and the need for better coordination between different branches of the military. For the Arab states, the war was a significant setback. Despite initial gains, the Arab forces were ultimately defeated, and the conflict had a demoralizing effect on the Arab world. The war also exposed the limitations of Soviet military support, as the Soviet Union was unable to prevent the defeat of its allies in Egypt and Syria. The war also had significant diplomatic consequences. In the aftermath of the conflict, a number of peace initiatives were launched, including the Geneva Conference of 1973 and the Camp David Accords of 1978. These initiatives aimed to resolve the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Arab states and to address the broader issues of Middle East peace and stability. The Yom Kippur War was a significant conflict that had far-reaching consequences for both Israel and the Arab states. The war demonstrated the continued tensions and deep-seated animosity between Israel and its Arab neighbors and highlighted the willingness of the Arab states to use military force to achieve their goals. The conflict also exposed weaknesses in the military strategies and tactics of both sides and had significant diplomatic consequences. While the war ultimately ended in a ceasefire, it set the stage for ongoing conflict in the region and the continued pursuit of peace initiatives aimed at resolving the broader issues of Middle East peace and stability.